let's move on to some interesting news about child tax credits.
Sure.
So we talked last week about the expansion of the child tax credit nationally and how there is a deal being cooked up in the Senate for an expansion of the child tax credit, not as much as it was expanded under the American Rescue Plan, but still a solid expansion, like $200 more for the first year, $300 for the next, $400 for the next.
And so the American Rescue Plan was the legislation that the Biden administration put out in 2021, I believe. That's when he came into office as a response to COVID to subsidize families, give them more buying power.
Perfect. Yeah. So now states are interested in, what if we did our own child tax credit? What if we did it on the state level as well on the federal level? So the Illinois Economic Policy Institute worked on this with other Illinois elected officials and economists in the state. And so they were trying to see what a state level tax credit would be able to do. Well, they outlined 5 major points that it could benefit. So it would reduce childhood poverty by at least 10%, directly impact at least half of all Illinois' children, cut income taxes by at least 10% for eligible households, improve racial equity, boosting Illinois' economy by at least $1 billion annually. Now, these are all very amazing things. And now with the child tax credit, it all matters about how it's being formulated. So the Illinois Economic Policy Institute go through 7 different scenarios. I'm not going to go through every 7 because that could be its whole deep dive on its own. But the point is that the major scenario they're focusing on is, what if we gave a tax credit of about $1,200 every year? This is something that's already been passed in the Senate, that has already been proposed in the Senate and proposed in the House in Illinois. And this would achieve all 5 of those goals. $1,200 a month. $1,200 for every child would improve all 5 of those metrics. So the long-term gains are drastic. Not just obviously to child poverty, to child hunger, but also actually help with the Illinois' economic growth. So for every dollar committed by the state of Illinois towards this child tax credit, it would produce $1.17 to $1.45 in economic output. This is a large economic multiplier. That means that this money is actually very, very efficient in the way it's going to, move through the economy and get back into the Illinois Treasury through increased taxes of economic growth. Now, this corroborates the studies that were done on the American Rescue Plan's child tax credit, where the American Rescue Plan tax credit had a 1.25 economic multiplier effect. So it's nice to see that 2 separate studies of similar policy resulted in the same result. You always want to see that type of be able to duplicate
consistency.
That.
Yeah,
you want to see that consistency, and so that's what we're seeing. The child tax credit is getting more and more value proven with every study that comes out about it. And so what's great about this is not only is it increasing the economic multiplier, growing the economy faster, lifting children out of poverty, it's also reducing the amount of money that Illinois will have to spend on anti-poverty programs, such as the Protection for Women, Infants, and Children. For the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infant, and Children, the WIC program, and the Earned Income Tax Credit as well. So all of these other services actually get reduced, and Illinois ends up saving $115 million every year, a 15.4% reduction into what they were spending on these programs before the child tax credit going into place.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's just all positive news, and it makes it difficult for me when such positive news comes out about these economic policies when it receives pushback, because okay, if I can prove to you that it increases economic growth, if I can prove to you that the money being spent goes directly to food, shelter, and children's products, if I can prove to you that it reduces the need of welfare programs, what more do you need to see until you finally get on board with such a policy?
Exactly. If it not only helps everyone who's a recipient, but also means the government is going to spend less money because it doesn't have to pay so much for those welfare programs, you kind of start to get to the point where the only argument I can hear in return is, I don't want to give that party the win.
Or I don't want to give that party the win, or it's against my philosophy, right?
Yeah.
It's against my ideology. I don't believe in welfare.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, do you accept your mortgage tax reduction as a homeowner? If you do that, are you receiving welfare? This is a person receiving a tax credit for having a child the same way you receive a tax credit for having a mortgage.
Even this is so, like, it is such a stretch to try to make that argument. We're talking about a tax cut.
Yeah.
That's
This is a
the
tax
most
cut.
Republican thing I can imagine.
Yes, and I love the framing of this as a tax cut.
Yeah.
Letting you keep more of your own money.
Exactly.
So there's really this is something that Republicans and Democrats should be able to get behind. We're seeing it on the national level slightly, not as much as I want to see it, but it's happening slowly. If this starts happening state by state and then eventually happens to the federal government, we're talking about a reduction in child poverty like 75%, like you've never seen.
Yeah.
If everything goes well.
I really love the idea of going state by state. If these are the numbers that can play out in other states, which I wouldn't be surprised about, right? Like that's going to build the political pressure that you need going up to the federal level.
Yeah.
At the federal level, I expect things are much harder to get done because the parties do, especially the current Republican Party, does care so much more about not letting the Democrats get a win.
Oh, for sure.
Right? And at the state level, you'll find a lot of these states where there are more significant majorities on either side. And I would love to see if some Republican heavy majorities, right, passed something like this to show that it doesn't have to be a partisan effort because of the kind of evidence that we're seeing.
Yeah, and this is one of those issues where, look, I appreciate the diversification of the American government. Justice Brandeis in the 1920s and 30s always said, the states are the laboratories of democracy, and this is what should be happening now. We should see those types of experiments. And an expanded child tax credit on the statewide level, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat state, is something everyone should be able to get behind. It should not be a financial burden to have a child, or at least a financial burden that's going to put that child in poverty.
Definitely not. No, of course not.
There's no reason.
The one piece of context I will add, just because we've kind of been alluding to it. We talked about the child tax credit at the federal level last week. I feel like we might be making it seem like Democrats are significantly more in favor of this than the Republicans. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I haven't seen that. The bill at the federal level was introduced by a Democrat and a Republican. We talked about resistance on both sides to the bill for different reasons. The Democrats wanted more assistance in the child tax credit. The Republicans didn't. They were reluctant. It didn't seem like they would find a path to tie it up in a package of other legislation that they would be okay with. So I'm not sure if this a partisan thing.
Well, if we look at the House, it's a partisan thing. No Republican will vote for this in the House of Representatives. Maybe like 2.
None of them.
Maybe 3 or 4.
Okay.
Max.
Well, because the co-author of the bill
is a House
Republican.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's just not. I think it's one of like those New York Republicans,
Okay.
right? Where they're like in a Biden plus 10 seat.
Okay.
And so it's not this. But there again, that doesn't mean in the Senate that it's not, right? So we've seen this time and time again where the bipartisan infrastructure bill was voted on by like 25 Senate Republicans or 20 Senate Republicans, or the CHIPS Act was by like 20 Senate Republicans. It didn't get a lot of Republican support in the House, but it got that support in the Senate, and that's what I expect to happen with the child tax credit as well.
Okay.
It's one of those things. But the people in the House, I feel, have a less ideological aversion to it and more of a I don't want Joe Biden to win aversion to it.
Yeah. That's my feeling, at least.
No, and I agree with that. Yeah. But child tax credit on the Illinois level, let's get it going, guys. Be the first, please.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I do just love seeing on a broader level, state level innovation policy like this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like no one was talking about child tax credit at the state level, and
Nope.
they just came out with this.